Welcome to Last Minute Lecture. This free chapter overview is designed to help students review and understand key concepts. These summaries supplement, not replace, the original textbook and may not be redistributed or resold. For complete coverage, always consult the official text. Estimating speed is actually pretty easy. I mean, if you drive 100 miles in 2 hours, your average speed is 50 miles per hour. It's clean, it's intuitive, and the math just works out perfectly.
Right, yeah, because you have a really clear distance divided by a clear amount of time. You're just looking at an average over a whole journey.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But if you stand by the highway and freeze a single frame of a car whipping past you, trying to find its exact speed in that exact microscopic slice of space with zero time passing, that's where the math it breaks.
Oh, completely. You can't divide a distance by zero time. It's a total paradox.
Right.
And, solving that paradox didn't just tell us how fast cars go. It actually gave us the fundamental language to map any dynamic system.
Wow.
Whether you're engineering the curvature of an aircraft wing or modeling radioactive decay or even just tracking the insane fluctuations of the financial markets, you absolutely have to be able to calculate instantaneous change.
And that is exactly what we are diving into today.
Oh.
So welcome to a very special deep dive designed as a one-on-one tutoring session just for you.
Yeah, we're glad you're here.
If you are listening right now, you are stepping into the classroom with the Last Minute Lecture team. And our mission today, we are going to completely demystify Chapter 7 of the Cambridge AS and A-Level Mathematics coursebook. We are conquering the world of differentiation.
We really are going to build this from the ground up. So by the end of this session, you'll understand, not just the shortcut rules of calculus, but exactly why they actually work.
Yeah. So whether you are cramming for a test tomorrow morning and need the concepts to finally click, or you're just intensely curious about the math that runs the universe, just sit back. We've got you covered.
We definitely do.
Let's start with a core problem. I mean, back at the IGCSE or O-level, when you needed the slope of a curve, you kind of just faked it, right?
Yeah, pretty much.
You'd take a physical ruler, draw a straight line that brushed against the curve, and then just calculate the slope of your ruler.
Exactly. You were basically drawing a tangent line by eye, which is incredibly frustrating if you actually want precision. Literally, depending on the thickness of your pencil lead, you and the person sitting right next to you are going to get totally different gradients for the exact same point.
It's like guessing that car's speed by just listening to the engine. It's just an estimate.
Yeah.
So how do we find the exact mathematical gradient of a curve at a single point without drawing anything at all?
Right, because we only have one point.
Yeah. And old school algebra literally demands 2 points to find a slope.
Yeah.
A change in y divided by a change in x.
Exactly. So we use this brilliant conceptual workaround called first principles. Since we absolutely need 2 points, we sort of cheat a little bit. Let's visualize a simple curve, like the parabola y equals x squared.
Okay, I'm picturing it.
Now you pick the exact point where you want the exact slope.
Okay, let's say the coordinate 0.24.
Perfect. Now we pick a second point on the curve, but we place it very, very close to your first point, say at an x-coordinate of 2.1.
All right, so they're super close.
Right. We now have 2 distinct points, so we can connect them with a straight line, which we call a chord, and easily calculate the gradient between them using basic algebra.
But wait, that's still just an average slope between 2 points, isn't it? It's not the exact slope at our original point.
True. But here is the magic trick of calculus. Imagine that second point sliding down the curve, getting closer and closer to your original point.
Okay.
In mathematics, we use the Greek letter delta to represent a tiny shifting change. So the distance between the x-coordinates is called delta x.
Okay, so we are basically watching delta x shrink.
Exactly. As delta x shrinks and shrinks until it fundamentally tends towards 0, the distance between the 2 points effectively vanishes.
Oh, wow.
And the gradient of that straight chord smoothly morphs into the exact tangent gradient of the curve itself.
I want to make sure I'm visualizing this right.
Yeah.
So if we run that limit process for y equals x squared as delta x approaches 0, why does the messy algebra beautifully simplify down to just 2x?
Well, think about it geometrically. Imagine a square with sides of length x. The area is obviously x squared, right?
Right.
Now, increase the sides by a tiny microscopic amount, delta x. Where does the new area go?
It would like add a tiny skinny strip to the top edge and maybe a tiny skinny strip to the right edge.
Exactly. 2 strips. And each has a length of x and a microscopic width of delta x. So the new area added is roughly 2 times x.
Oh, okay.
There's also a tiny microscopic corner piece where the strips meet, but as delta x shrinks to 0, that corner piece is so infinitely small, it just vanishes entirely.
Wow. So the rate of change, the area, the derivative of x squared, is perfectly logically 2x. That is an incredible aha moment.
It's beautiful, isn't it? And this whole limit process is exactly what we call differentiation.
It is beautiful, but I'll be honest, if I have an exam doing that entire first principles limit process, like setting up the chords, expanding all the delta brackets, and shrinking it all to 0 every single time I need a slope, that sounds like a complete nightmare.
Oh, it would be awful. And thankfully, you really don't have to. Mathematicians over the centuries did all the heavy lifting for us.
Oh, thank goodness.
Yeah, they noticed these undeniable patterns in the limits, and those patterns give us instant shortcuts.
Okay, well, before we get into the actual shortcut rules, I need to understand the language being thrown around in the textbook. Like, what am I actually looking at when an equation suddenly shifts to did x or f prime of x?
Oh, yeah, those are just different dialects of the same language, really.
Okay.
The mathematician Leibniz used the notation did x. It literally means the derivative of y with respect to x. It's a direct visual nod to that tiny change in y divided by the tiny change in x from our chord.
Got it. And what about the other one?
The mathematician Lagrange, on the other hand, used f with a little dash, which is read as f prime of x. But they both just mean the gradient function.
Okay, I've also seen Isaac Newton's notation with a little dot over the y, but I know Leibniz's did x and Lagrange's f prime are kind of the gold standards for Cambridge exams. So let's talk about the ultimate cheat code, the power rule.
Yes, the power rule is basically the engine of basic differentiation. Because of the patterns discovered in those limits, we know that if you have any function in the form y equals x to the power of n, the derivative is elegantly simple.
Okay, lay it on me.
You pull the power n down to the front to multiply, and then you just drop the original exponent by exactly 1.
So it's a rhythm. Pull the power down, drop the exponent by 1.
Exactly.
So if I have y equals x to the power of 7, I pull the 7 down, drop the power to 6, and I immediately know the gradient function is 7x to the power of 6.
Precisely. It becomes muscle memory very quickly.
Wait, hold on though. What if the equation isn't a clean polynomial? Like if I have a fraction, say y equals 1 over x squared, the power rule completely breaks down, doesn't it? I mean, there is no top level power to pull down.
It only appears to break down because of the formatting. This is actually a critical rule for differentiation. You cannot differentiate a fraction like that directly using the basic power rule.
Right. That makes sense.
You must use your knowledge of indices to rewrite it as a standard power first.
Ah, right. Basic algebra. 1 over x squared is algebraically identical to x to the power of negative 2.
Exactly. Now, the power rule works perfectly. You pull the negative 2 down to the front. Then be careful with negative numbers. When you subtract 1 from negative 2, you drop down to negative 3.
All right.
So the result is negative 2x to the power of negative 3.
Okay, that makes total sense. But what happens when things get really messy? What if I'm staring at a massive, long polynomial string with like addition, subtraction, and standalone numbers scattered everywhere?
You divide and conquer. The rules of calculus state that you treat every term separated by a plus or minus sign as its own completely independent mini problem.
Oh, really? So you just go piece by piece?
Exactly. You just move down the line, applying the power rule to each piece one by one.
So if a piece is a scalar, multiple like 3x to the power of 4. I just multiply the 4 by the 3 to get 12, drop the power to 3, and that specific chunk becomes 12x cubed.
You got it.
But what about a standalone constant? Like, if there's just a plus 5 at the very end of the equation, there's no x to manipulate.
This is one of the most satisfying conceptual rules, honestly. The derivative of any standalone constant number is always 0.
Because... wait, let me think about this graphically. The graph of y equals 5 is just a perfectly flat horizontal line on a graph.
It is. And what is the slope of a flat horizontal line?
It has no slope. The gradient is literally 0.
Exactly. Constants never change, so their rate of change is 0. They just vanish from the derivative equation entirely.
Oh, man, that is deeply satisfying. Okay, so we can handle long strings of separate terms, but here is where my brain starts to hurt a bit. What happens when functions are nested inside of each other? Say I have an equation where an entire expression like 3x minus 2 is wrapped in brackets and raised to the power of 7. I absolutely do not want to sit there and algebraically expand a bracket out 7 times just to get a string of terms I can differentiate.
And it definitely shouldn't. When you have a function nested inside another function, expanding it is just a massive waste of time. Instead, we use the chain rule.
Okay, I've seen the formal formula for this in the textbook. It's ddex equals ddo multiplied by detx. Honestly, it looks like a bowl of alphabet soup.
Yeah, the notation is super intimidating, but the concept itself is brilliantly simple. Think of it like interconnected gears in a machine.
Okay.
Let's say gear A is connected to gear B, and gear B is connected to gear C.
All right, I'm picturing the gears turning.
If gear A turns 3 times as fast as gear B, and gear B turns 2 times as fast as gear C, how fast does gear A turn compared to gear C?
You just multiply them, right? 3 times 2 is 6. So gear A is turning 6 times faster.
Exactly. You multiply the rates of change. That is literally all the chain rule is doing. It allows you to separate the outside function from the inside function, find their rates of change independently, and just multiply them together.
Okay, let's apply that gear logic to my nightmare equation. So y equals the bracket 3x minus 2, all raised to the power of 7.
We can do this mentally in 3 steps. Outside, inside, multiply. First, differentiate the outside. Treat the entire bracket as one solid block, like a single giant x.
Okay.
What happens when you apply the power rule to a giant block to the power of 7?
Well, I'd pull the 7 down to the front and drop the exponent to 6. So I get 7 times the bracket to the power of 6. And I guess I don't touch the inside of the bracket at all yet.
Correct. That's your first gear. Now, for the second gear, look exclusively inside the brackets. Just the 3x minus 2. What is the derivative of just that piece?
The derivative of 3x is just 3, and the constant negative 2 becomes 0 and vanishes. So the inside derivative is simply 3.
Perfect. Finally, just multiply the gears. Multiply your outside result by your inside result.
So the 7 up front from the outside rule gets multiplied by the 3 from the inside rule, giving me 21.
Right.
So the final pristine answer is 21 times the bracket 3x minus 2 to the power of 6.
You just bypassed pages of algebraic expansion in 3 mental steps. That is the true power of the chain rule.
Okay, that is a massive time saver. So now we have this toolkit. We have the power rule, we have the chain rule, we know how to navigate negative exponents. We basically have this abstract algebraic machine that spits out gradient formulas. But what do we actually do with it?
We use it to map the physical geometry of the curve. With the gradient function, we can pinpoint the exact equations of tangent lines and normal lines at any specific coordinate on the graph.
Now, assuming we all remember our basic coordinate geometry, we already know what these lines are. A tangent skims the curve, sharing its exact slope at one point. And a normal cuts through that exact same point, but perfectly perpendicular to the tangent.
Right. And because you already know your coordinate geometry, you also know the master formula for building any straight line. Oh, you mean I minus y1 equals mn times x minus y1.
Exactly. Where y1 and y1 are the exact coordinate point on the graph, and m is the gradient. So really, the only new calculus piece of this entire puzzle is finding that elusive m, right?
Yeah, that makes sense.
The calculus just gives you the m. To find the equation of a tangent, you simply take your specific x-coordinate and plug it into your newly minted didx formula. The numerical value it spits out is your exact gradient m.
Okay, and if I need the normal line, because the geometry rule is that perpendicular lines have gradients that are negative reciprocals.
Exactly.
So if my calculus formula tells me my tangent gradient is, say, 6, and the gradient for my normal line is just negative 1 over 6.
You've got it. That is the entire conceptual framework.
So if I'm facing a brutal exam question asking for both the tangent and the normal, I really don't need to panic about the heavy algebra. The logic is just a sequence.
Step by step.
First, if they only give me an x-coordinate, I plug it into the original equation to find my e-coordinate. All the messy fractions and powers shake out, and I have my solid xy point. That is your anchor. Always find that first.
Then I differentiate the original equation to get my didx formula. I plug my x-coordinate into that new formula, and all the math shakes out to give me my numerical slope, m. From there, it's just dropping those numbers into the classic y minus y1 equals m times x minus by 1 formula.
It is incredibly systematic. Once you trust the logic, the arithmetic is really just filling in the blanks.
Okay, I'm feeling really confident about finding the rate of change of a curve. But here's a thought. Once I differentiate an equation and get my didx formula, well, that new formula is just another algebraic equation, right?
It is. It's exactly that. It's the gradient function.
So can I differentiate the derivative? Like, can I find the rate of change of the rate of change?
You absolutely can. And you've just stumbled into our final section for this session, which is second derivatives.
Okay, let's unpack this. If Leibniz's notation for the first derivative is dx, what is the notation for doing it twice?
It looks a bit strange at first glance. It's written as d squared y over dx squared. Or, if you are using Lagrange notation, it's simply f with a double prime.
Okay, and are the mechanics of finding it exactly the same? Like, if I use the chain rule to find my first derivative, and that new equation still has brackets and a power, do I just run the chain rule a second time, outside, inside, multiply all over again?
Exactly the same mechanics. Nothing changes there. But there is a massive conceptual trap here that catches thousands of students every single year, and we really need to clarify it right now.
Oh boy. Lay it on me.
You will definitely see exam questions trying to confuse you between taking the second derivative and simply squaring the first derivative.
Wait, squaring the first derivative? Like putting the entire dx formula in brackets and slapping a little 2 on the outside? Mathematically, isn't that somehow the same thing?
Not at all. They are entirely different mathematical realities. Think about what the numbers actually mean. If your dx evaluates to a slope of 4, squaring dx just gives you 16. It's just taking a slope and making it a bigger, largely meaningless number.
Okay, so what does the second derivative actually tell me then?
The second derivative tells you how the slope itself is behaving. Is the slope getting steeper? Is it flattening out? Is the curve bending upwards like a smile or downwards like a frown? Taking the second derivative evaluates the actual concavity of the curve. Squaring the first derivative is just, well, arithmetic. You must not confuse the two notations.
Okay, that is a crucial distinction. The first derivative is the slope itself. The second derivative is the behavior of the slope.
Exactly right.
Wow. Let's take a breath. We have covered a massive amount of conceptual ground in this tutoring session. We started with the paradox of freezing time, which naturally led us to first principles, shrinking the distance between 2 points until delta x hits 0.
Which is such a cool concept.
It really is. We visualized how x squared logically grows to a rate of 2x. We locked in the power rule rhythm. We used the interconnected gears of the chain rule to bypass impossible algebra. We anchored our abstract derivatives to geometric tangents and normals. And finally, we uncovered the second derivative.
You really have just built the complete foundational toolkit for differential calculus. You don't just know the rules now, you understand the actual machinery behind them.
But before we close the textbook and let you get back to studying, I want to leave you with one final puzzle to chew on.
Ooh, it's a fascinating one, too. If the first derivative tells us the slope of a curve, and the second derivative tells us how that slope is bending, I mean, the math doesn't actually forbid us from going further.
Right?
What about a third derivative? Or a fourth? Or even a fifth?
Yeah, think about it in the real world. If you have an equation mapping your position, the first derivative is your speed. The second derivative, the rate your speed changes, is your acceleration. So what physical reality does the third derivative represent? What actually happens when your acceleration changes?
Physicists actually have a name for it, and a name for the fourth, fifth, and sixth derivatives, too. The math just keeps peeling back layers of reality. It's something for you to explore on your own.
It really is the language of the universe. Next time you see a car whip past you on the highway, remember, you don't need to just guess its exact speed anymore. You have the mathematical tools to freeze time, calculate the exact instantaneous change, and understand exactly how it's moving. From the Last Minute Lecture team, a warm thank you for joining this deep dive into Chapter 7. Keep practicing those power rules, trust the logic, and we will see you next time.